For months, the global headlines regarding the Donetsk front were stagnant, painted in the grim colors of a meat grinder stalemate. Military analysts in Washington and London spoke of a grueling war of attrition where progress was measured in meters and paid for in thousands of lives. The Kremlin's propaganda machine, fueled by the ego of a dictator isolated in his own delusions, broadcasted a narrative of inevitable Russian steamrolling. But at 3:45 a.m., the geography of the Donbass changed forever. The darkness of the Donetsk steppe was not torn asunder by the clumsy, indiscriminate carpet bombing typical of the Russian scorched earth policy. Instead, it was pierced by the surgical precision of Ukrainian high-tech warfare. This was not a desperate lunge, but a masterclass in modern combined arms maneuver. While Moscow's generals were busy filing falsified reports of steady progress to satisfy a tyrant's appetite, Kiev delivered a lethal, calculated blow that has sent shockwaves from the muddy trenches of Pokrovsk to the gold-leafed halls of the Kremlin. In a staggering display of operational security and tactical speed, the armed forces of Ukraine, AFU, executed a lightning breakthrough. In less than one solar cycle, the frontline did not just move, it disintegrated for the occupiers. The offensive achieved a relentless 34-kilometer penetration through the primary and secondary Russian defensive lines. For strategic settlements, previously fortified by Russian paratroopers, VDV, and Stormzy units, have been completely cleared of enemy presence. These are not merely villages, they are the high ground anchors that dictate the ballistic control of the entire sector. Consequently, the logistical heart of the Russian occupation in Donetsk, Pokrovsk, is no longer a safe rear, but a furnace. Ukrainian long-range fires and specialized sabotage units have paralyzed the two primary supply hubs, effectively severing the umbilical cord of the Russian Second Combined Arms Army. The casualty figures for the Russian Federation are catastrophic. Initial battlefield damage assessments indicate the neutralization of over 850 personnel in this sector alone within the first 12 hours, alongside the destruction of 22 main battle tanks, including the much-vaunted T-90M Proryev and 45 armored fighting vehicles. This victory was not a product of luck, but the fruit of the Zelenskyy Doctrine, the fusion of indomitable national spirit with cutting-edge Western technological superiority. While Putin relies on the sheer mass of conscripts, treating human life as a cheap commodity in his imperial fantasies, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has championed a military transformation where Ukraine fought smarter. Using real-time synthetic aperture radar and signal intelligence, the AFU identified a critical gap in the Russian electronic warfare umbrella. Before the first Ukrainian tank moved, HIMARS and M270 systems systematically decapitated Russian command posts, with 6 high-ranking officers confirmed Kiev before they could even issue a counterorder. Furthermore, for the first time at this scale, Ukraine deployed first-person view drone swarms integrated with AI targeting, rendering Russian reactive armor useless. The contrast is jarring. On one side, we see the intellectual brilliance of a nation fighting for its right to exist. On the other, the rot and corruption of a regime where generals embezzle fuel money while their soldiers freeze in substandard gear. To the untrained eye, for settlements might seem minor, but to the military historian and the strategic expert, it is the end of the Russian offensive capability in the east. By seizing these specific coordinates, Ukraine has achieved fire control over the T-0504 highway. Every Russian truck, fuel tanker, and ammunition crate moving toward the front is now a target for Ukrainian precision strikes. The strategic inversion is real. Russia, which spent 6 months and 20,000 lives trying to seize a single town, has lost more ground in 24 hours than they gained in the last quarter. The psychological impact is immeasurable, as the Russian Z-patriots on social media are in a state of meltdown, realizing that the invincible red line was drawn in sand, not stone. This breakthrough is a direct rebuke to those who preached Ukraine fatigue and a reminder to the tax-paying citizens of the United States and Europe that their support is producing the highest return on investment in the history of global security. the dismantling of a nuclear-armed aggressor without a single NATO soldier in the trenches. As we analyze the smoke rising from the Russian logistics hubs, we see more than just burning diesel. We see the funeral pyre of 21st century autocracy. Ukraine is not just defending a border, they are defending the very concept of the international rules-based order. The logistics are severed, the command is blind, and the tyrant is failing as the Ukrainian spearhead remains refueled and recalibrated for the next phase of this systemic collapse. To understand the full magnitude of the shift, one must dissect the mechanics of what is now being hailed as the strike of justice. On the Donetsk front, the Ukrainian armed forces executed a blindingly fast 34-kilometer deep penetration, punching through the dense, multi-layered defensive lines that the Kremlin had boasted were impenetrable. This was not merely an advance, it was a systemic dismantling of Russian operational integrity. Battlefront data, cold and unforgiving, tells the story that Moscow's state media desperately tries to bury. The liberation of the 4 strategic settlements is not just a tactical victory. It represents the acquisition of dominant high ground that grants Ukraine total visual and ballistic command over the surrounding valleys. But the true epicenter of this collapse is the neutralization of the 2 primary logistics centers. This is a direct strike at the central nervous system of the Russian military apparatus. As the ammunition depots and fuel reservoirs in Pokrovsk turned into infernos, the reality for thousands of Russian troops on the front lines became grim. No shells to fire, no food to eat, and, crucially, no path for retreat. Ukraine's utilization of swarm drone tactics, integrated with sophisticated electronic warfare, EW, to jam Russian communications, has turned the vaunted T-90 Proryev tanks, the crown jewels of the Russian armored corps, into burning heaps of scrap metal before they could even pivot their turrets to return fire. For those watching with a keen eye on geopolitics and grand strategy, the significance of Pokrovsk cannot be overstated. As the old military axiom dictates, tactics win battles, but logistics win wars. Pokrovsk is the singular, vital artery connecting the various Russian combat wings across the east. With this knot tightened by Ukrainian maneuver forces, the entire Russian defensive structure in Donetsk is beginning to collapse with the inevitability of falling dominoes. The contrast between the 2 sides could not be more stark. On one side stands Ukraine, agile, empowered by AI-driven intelligence, and fueled by the raw determination of professionalized, highly mobile soldiers. On the other side, we see a crumbling Russian force, defined by deep-seated systemic rot, where corrupt officers siphon off soldiers' salaries and troops are treated as expendable fodder to satisfy the whims of a tyrant in the shadows, Vladimir Putin. Isolated in his bunker in Moscow, a man so detached from the cold reality of the battlefield that he still clings to the delusion that his army is the second strongest in the world. The bitter reality unfolding in Donetsk is a slap in the face to this failing autocrat. Russia is no longer projecting power, it is retreating in humiliation. This is the triumph of intellectual agility over the brute, mindless mass of the past. Every meter of soil liberated serves as an undeniable testament to the superiority of a free, democratic mindset over the rigid, decaying structure of a dying dictatorship. The Russian military machine is not just bleeding, it is seizing up, its gears jammed by its own incompetence, while the Ukrainian advance continues to systematically dismantle the remnants of their regional command. The tremors felt across the Donetsk front do not dissipate at the borders of Ukraine. They are generating seismic waves that are fundamentally and irreversibly reshaping the international political chessboard. For the discerning investor, the seasoned policy analyst, and the citizens of the United States who track the pulses of the global political economy, the implications are becoming undeniable. The struggle in Ukraine has evolved into a definitive litmus test for the future of the rules-based international order. Investing in the stability of a sovereign, democratic Ukraine is no longer merely a humanitarian gesture, it is an investment in the architecture of a stable, transparent, and predictable world economy. The collapse of the Russian defensive line at Pokrovsk is sending a visceral shiver down the spines of the regimes tethered to Putin's survival. from the corridors of Tehran to the closed-off chambers of Pyongyang, as the true, rusted extent of Russia's war machine is laid bare for the world to see. The cumulative weight of Western economic sanctions is finally delivering a crushing, terminal blow to the Kremlin's capability to sustain this aggression. The Russian defense budget is hemorrhaging at an unsustainable rate. Their sovereign wealth is being incinerated in the furnace of a failed occupation, and the Russian ruble has been reduced to little more than volatile, depreciating paper. The final, crumbling facade of Russian military invincibility, once a cornerstone of their geopolitical posturing, has evaporated into the ether of history, leaving the Kremlin naked before its own failures. In striking contrast, the image of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy appearing at the front lines, amidst the soldiers of a hard-won victory, radiates a resolve that stands in total opposition to a man trapped in his own mounting paranoia. Zelenskyy does not hide in a bunker, he stands with his people. He has emerged not merely as a head of state, but as the pulsating soul of a new era, an era where justice, transparency, and the rule of law are systematically reclaiming ground from the shadows of deceit, systemic corruption, and brutal violence. Putin, by contrast, is now a leader increasingly isolated, suspicious of his own inner circle, and fearful of the very military command structure he once commanded with an iron fist. The tyrant's shadow is shrinking, while the light of the Ukrainian resistance is illuminating the path forward for the entire free world. We stand at a definitive historical pivot point, and the consequences of these battlefield shifts are reverberating through three primary domains. First, on the military front, the reality is stark. Russia has fundamentally lost the capacity for large-scale, decisive offensive operations. They are now relegated to a state of desperate, static contraction, a slow-motion retreat, waiting for the inevitable systemic collapse that accompanies the loss of logistics, supply lines, and the fighting spirit of their conscripts. This is not a temporary setback. It is the exhaustion of an imperial model that has no answer to the technological and tactical agility of a modern, motivated, and highly skilled military force. Second, on the diplomatic front, the strategic paradigm has shifted. Ukraine's leverage at any future negotiating table has been solidified in the blood of its defenders and the indisputable triumph of their recent maneuver warfare. The international community, led by the Transatlantic Alliance, now recognizes that there can be no sustainable peace without the absolute, non-negotiable restoration of Ukraine's sovereign territorial integrity. The appeasement narrative is dead. The path to peace is now paved with strength. Third, on the psychological front, the Russian citizenry is finally beginning to awaken from their state-induced, decades-long stupor. They are starting to grasp that the hollow, imperial promises of a great Russian empire were nothing more than a lethal trap, a vanity project orchestrated by a failing dictator who has gambled their children's future for his own narrow, ego-driven legacy. The cracks in the Kremlin's control are widening, and the fear that once silenced dissent is being replaced by the cold, hard realization of defeat. This Donetsk counteroffensive serves as the clarion call for the end of a dark, regressive chapter in Eastern European history. This is the moment for the free world to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, ensuring that the torch of liberty, so fiercely guarded by the Ukrainian people, never flickers into extinction. The strategic balance of power has tilted decisively in favor of Kiev. The significance of the Battle of Pokrovsk will be etched into the annals of history as a profound lesson in how a resilient, courageous nation, under the leadership of a modern-day hero, can dismantle a dying authoritarian monster that threatened to consume the regional peace. We are witnessing the twilight of the Russian-style unipolar fantasy and the emergence of a more resilient, integrated, and determined alliance of free nations. We thank you for joining us in this analysis.